the DeFUD Podcast. Chris Sestito, who goes by Tito, is the chairman of the board, co-founder, and CEO of HiddenLayer. Previously, Tito served as the VP of Engineering and Data Science at Qualys, Senior Director of Data Science at Agere, and Director of Threat Research at Cylance. Tito has spent over a decade securing AI models, predicting this need long before the explosion that we see today of Gen AI. So in 2023, HiddenLayer raised a $50 million Series A led by M12, Microsoft's venture fund, and more strategic ventures, and it defends Fortune 100 companies' AI models across several verticals, including finance, government defense, and cybersecurity. Just wow. We are excited to have Tito on the DeFUD podcast today. And let's start with the journey and the founding story, right? So can you tell us about a formative experience that drew you to AI security?
I'm very excited to be here. Absolutely. I wish I could tell you that it was a big stroke of genius, but in reality, we were just victims of an AI attack, one of the earliest attacks on AI models. So I'm very lucky to be founding with two of my best friends, Jim Ballard and Tanner Burns, who are the co-founders here. And we've worked together at the last 6 organizations. So we've always traveled as a pack. And we were actually working at Cylance, where I led research and intelligence there, both kind of the threat research and data science teams, and Jim and Tanner on my team as well. And it was in 2019 where we had a machine learning model in the Cylance Protect product, which was the next step in antivirus. Now all the next gen antivirus companies or the endpoint security companies are leveraging machine learning models in order to detect malicious attacks. So Cylance was one of the earlier ones. And essentially, through interaction with a free trial version of our product, threat actors were able to commit an adversarial AI attack. And basically, they were able to reverse the model inside of our product and then learn how to bypass it. They even built a surrogate offline, completely stealing the model. And so Tanner, Jim, and I led the response effort there. And it was 4 months, a lot of resources, a lot of our smartest people, and just really a dedicated effort to putting out that fire. And it was really throughout that process that we realized artificial intelligence is an incredibly vulnerable technology. It was vulnerable at a code level, vulnerable at inference time. It's now very vulnerable on the generative side. And so it was really that event that led us to understand that a platform-driven solution was going to be required. And just about every sort of form of security that we think about needing on endpoints, we also need a form-fit version of that for artificial intelligence. And so that's what we set out to build.
And I would just say you really saw this trend ahead of the curve because HiddenLayer is one of the first entrants in this sector, right, of AI security. And of course, now we have an explosion of other AI entrants, right, other AI security entrants. And so I want to tug on the thread that you talked about with generative AI security as well. Right.
Sure.
So in one of your research articles, you found on average that companies have about 1,689, hopefully I got the number exactly correct, in production. And so can you tell us more about what type of models they are? Because you mentioned generative just now, and how many of them are large language models?
Absolutely. And I think that's a really interesting finding on our behalf. And I'll give you a little background on it, which is usually when we approach these security leaders and data science leaders at these Fortune 500 organizations or sometimes these government organizations, we always ask them, how many models are in production? How many models are you responsible for defending? And on average, they answer around 80, roughly 80 is their average answer. And then we have a discovery solution. So we'll go in the environment and we'll scan for them. And then we, on average, find that almost 1,700 models are present in their production systems. And it's generally a pretty big shock to them. And then when you start thinking about things like employees who can just download straight from Hugging Face or TensorFlow Hub or these open repositories, or even things like applications that contain models that you weren't otherwise aware of that you've now put in your system or in your cloud environments, it's really pretty prevalent. And models are, generally speaking, pretty prevalent. We've already seen a lot of technical convergence in other applications and just general technological assets that are out there containing these models. They're in operating systems. They're in the applications we all use every day. So that's to get more towards your question of kind of what is out there. The real answer is everybody's using everything, especially when you get to the top of the enterprise. I think oftentimes what we see in production, like in those hardware and software products, tends to be like internally developed models, or oftentimes models that started from like a pre-trained case that was then further trained for that organization's use cases. But we are starting to see more adoption on the LLM side now, and whether it be something that they internally leverage and developed and are trying to have their own foundational model, or whether it be leveraging an API from OpenAI or Anthropic or something along those lines. I still think most organizations today are looking for more in the way of security controls like us before they're feeling comfortable allowing something like a foundational model to interact directly with their customers. But we're certainly on the cusp of that. But another interesting statistic that came out from Gartner a few weeks back is they expect the boom in generative AI to grow internal machine learning models by about 1,000% this year. And it really is an entire ecosystem that's being leveraged. I think organizations are generally pretty curious and they want to use whatever the best tool is for the job. And sometimes that tool is a big foundational model. Sometimes it's a smaller, more purpose-driven model. But generally speaking, I think organizations are pretty aggressive today with their AI strategy. And so it's important to then put in place those same sort of infrastructure that you would around other technological assets, security being, in my opinion, the most important, but certainly one of those components that would allow you then to be responsible and deploy with controls.
And of course, the $1 billion question today, right? Because so many enterprises, and coming from AWS, right? Fortune 500 enterprises really are bread and butter around data usage, or nowadays, right? How can I build LLM applications? And you mentioned just that, right? Using hidden layer controls helps companies and enterprises really feel safe about adopting this new Gen AI technology. And so, having really existed pre large language models or this Gen AI wave, can you maybe tell for our listeners what's the difference between general AI security versus LLM security? And how is securing LLMs different?
Absolutely. And it's a really important question because I think often people in the technological industry or technology industry who aren't as familiar in the AI space, they tend to conflate those and or put everything in one big AI bucket. And they're definitely different. But I think one of the sort of most powerful things about hidden layers technology specifically is how we've opted to work in feature vectors and outputs of models, which really gives us a very powerful opportunity to secure all model frameworks with the same technology. Certainly, there are ways to optimize for a trillion input models versus 10 input models or something like that. So we have some engineering problems that we've been able to solve there for optimization. But generally speaking, we address them in the same way. Now, there are certainly nuances that I'll go into here as well to talk about the differences in the two. But I think what we've seen a little bit more in terms of what's made it all the way to production are just like models that we had at Cylance, where internally you have a data science team that either starts from a pre-trained model, maybe off of something like Hugging Face or another repository, and then does a whole bunch of fine tuning, that kind of perfect use case for whatever that data set is or whatever that use case is within that organization. And so that would be more of like that traditional machine learning use case where you had your own data set, you were training it from there. And then really the generative side, or really, I think what's helpful for me is the mental model that I have, which may be useful for the listeners here, is I separate the generative side in today's AI into what I just call foundational models. And I think that's a normal term, but essentially you have these big model providers that train on the entire internet or everything they can get their hands on that are really multi-purpose. And the idea is that this model should be able to do whatever you need it to do. And then the other bucket for me in my mental model is purpose-driven models that have been trained to do one specific task, or at least operate within a relatively defined scope. And so I think we still see a lot more of the defined scope models in production today. But I think that the massive sort of advantage that these organizations are looking for is LLMs are performing extremely well, certainly better than anybody thought they would at this point in time. And so a lot of organizations want to bring that in, but with a broader scope of opportunity for what that model is trained to deliver, that's also a more broad attack surface in order to interact with. And so now to bring it back to your question in terms of what does it mean to secure these smaller purpose-driven models versus these large language models, we have to think about a couple different things. And the first one is, what is that model intended to operate in or on? And as I mentioned, if a model is supposed to understand the entire world, then there's probably a pretty large attack surface represented in there as well. And when you're interacting with that model through things like prompts and responses, and whether that model sits inside the organization or whether you're leveraging an API from one of these big AI providers, then it's really more about interacting with that model. And attacks start to look like things like, how do I get access to something that I shouldn't have had access to? Or how do I force a hallucination? Or how do I get some desired outcome or attain a bunch of information I'm not supposed to get? Or how do I execute code in areas that model has access to that I don't? I think these are all massive new problems that we dedicate to solving with our AI detection and response. But essentially, these are the scope there. And then those purpose-driven models, I think that they have a whole different set of very equally dangerous, but very different opportunities of attack when you look at things like even just models are simply code at the end of the day. And at the moment, they're code with a lot less infrastructure than we see from other forms of executable code, like Microsoft portable executables or something along those lines. And so really what that means as a threat actor is if I'm in an environment, or I can gain access to an environment through traditional means, and then I find an internal model where I can execute whatever code I want, and I can use to pivot for things. I can inject code. We've found here at HiddenLayer, we found over 2,000 examples of malicious models in the ecosystem today, whether they're on like public repositories or whether they've been downloaded into groups that we work with, that we want to work with. But essentially, there are sort of these issues at the code level. And then, as we mentioned, there's the model theft. And the smaller the model is, that you can see dedicated techniques there. I think one of the scariest pieces when targeting these purpose-driven models is how many automated attack tools already exist on the internet today. You can go on GitHub and download about 50 of them today that you don't really have to have any data science expertise. You can just point these attacks. They'll start with black box attacks on a model. They'll learn more about it, and then you can pivot into more attacks that are deliberately targeting that type of model, whether it be their framework or the type of data going through it. And just companies are a little bit more engaged in that kind of purpose-driven model category. So are attackers. They've had more access to that. They've got more tools in their toolkit to attack those types of models. But models that are heavily exposed, like on the generative side, means there's a lot of opportunity to interact with them. And that generally means we're going to see a lot of attacks. And that means we're going to see a lot of different attack techniques because the entire world has access to them there. Both are equally important. They're definitely out there, but yeah, they are very different in terms of how you would develop solutions for them.
So would you say then, in terms of your product platform, that you have different capabilities depending on if it's a generative model versus a traditional AI model?
Yeah, we 100%. We have both in terms of optimization for things like size and complexities, but yeah, we absolutely do, and including how you would interact with that model, whether it's through prompts and responses for an LLM or whether it's through inputs like a document or an image for one of those purpose-driven models. So we absolutely have a different product set for it's the same underlying technology, but it's definitely looking for different sort of techniques, and they've really been fit for that use case.
Which actually brings me to our next question, right? You talked about cyber attacks being actually part of the inspiration for you starting HiddenLayer. And so now I'm actually going to share the OWASP top 10 LLM attacks, right? That I'm sure you probably have seen this and talk to customers often about this. And so if we're looking at things at this diagram, what do customers come to you, HiddenLayer, most often about? What are they most concerned about?
Yeah, and I don't mean to give much of a cop-out answer here, but I think they're very concerned with a lot of these things. I think oftentimes one of the ways to answer this question is, what are we seeing from the attackers in the wild today? And that's definitely a lot of the prompt injection side. There's a major concern, especially in the heavily regulated industries, for things like divulging PII or their customers' data via these models. We definitely see a good amount of that. And then on the model theft side, that's certainly been a major issue for organizations. Not that long ago, maybe a month and a half ago, OpenAI had to cut off ByteDance's account to the parent company of TikTok because they were very clearly exhibiting behaviors of stealing GPT versus actually trying to use it as intended. And so I think we definitely see that on the provider side. And then, yeah, there's certainly examples of like denial of service. There's examples of supply chain vulnerabilities that we use our scanner for. So I think it's pretty holistic. I think customers are really interested in all of these issues. And I think one of the messages that I really believe is important to convey is we should be holding artificial intelligence to the same standards that we hold other technological assets, and no more, no less. We don't want to go overboard here and risk slowing down innovation, but at the same time, the same sort of things that we do with an endpoint should be equally as important for artificial intelligence, oftentimes even more important because of how critical the use cases tend to be. And just to give examples of that, one of the things we do for our customers that's incredibly simple, but also very critical to what we do is just log inferences with the model and the requester, and give you the opportunity to audit those interactions with your model. That's something that we would never accept a lack of even basic logging in any other technological asset. So I'm not really sure why AI is currently getting a pass. And so that's the type of thing that we like to say. A lot of that fundamental security infrastructure just needs to be there. And so I think that really to be more specific around your question, I think there's a little bit more of a, hey, help us get there. What should we be concerned with? And OWASP Top 10 is fantastic for LLM specifically, but a lot of these individual categories apply to other forms of artificial intelligence as well. I think the easiest way to understand it is thinking about what have we had to secure in the past? What ways do we have to secure it? And then think, does that apply to AI? And about 90% of the time it does. And so we need to look at the supply chain. We need to look at the real-time detection and response capabilities. We need to look at those generative outputs. We need to look at the network communications of these models and the stakeholders of them and the systems that are stakeholders of them. And really, it's at the end of the day, it's not much different than other technologies. It certainly requires different and new detection mechanisms and ways to understand the attacks that are against them and those techniques. But the end goals are the same. We need to secure our code. We need to secure our communications. We need to secure our customers.
Gotcha. And so certainly to your point, a lot of these categories aren't net new for generative AI models, but really it's a carryover from traditional AI security. So I think it's really interesting, and we'll certainly get to this a little bit later with the product demo, is how actually the platform exposes different capabilities based on the use cases that customers bring.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that was really great. Thanks for going over the top 10 with me. So in terms of going to some learnings or blind spots, right, through the HiddenLayer journey, what have you learned from helping customers defend LLM applications at scale?
The most interesting part of the job so far has really been understanding just how widespread the use cases for artificial intelligence already were in these environments, even pre-GPT and the LM boom. I think it's so cool to go to organizations and just be blown away by their AI use cases. We work with one oil and gas company that has over 1,000 models, and they're leveraging artificial intelligence all over the place. And that's traditionally an industry vertical that doesn't usually lean so quickly into new technologies. And so to see that they're using models for things like discovery of new drill sites, as well as which one of their employees is going to quit. There are so many different use cases all across the board. And really, I could give so many examples of that. I think that's been probably the biggest sort of shock to me is really artificial intelligence. We thought early like 2012 timeframe, we were very early users of it at Cylance, but in reality, there were a lot of groups like that in all sorts of different industry verticals that were leaning into the way that machine learning could really advance their decision-making engines inside of that business. And that's certainly continued on over the last 12 years. And so I would say, yeah, the biggest shock by far has been how much organizations are already leveraging artificial intelligence in different forms. Because I think the sort of the messaging that we've seen from whether it be spots in the analyst community or investors or others, they say, oh, maybe these organizations aren't always ready for AI, or they know they want to do it, but they're not really sure what to do. Definitely not the case across the board. There are a lot of organizations that have been very data science forward in general, and they have these fantastic teams where they're contributing significant research and development resources, and they're leveraging that, and the organization is definitely receiving the benefits of it. Of course, it's a spectrum. You have your organizations that are a little bit more forward leaning there, and then you have some that are trying to catch up a bit. But I would say that's been the biggest shock to me.
In that process, do you find yourself like working with quite a few channel partners? Because what I'm hearing is large enterprises who may not have homegrown Gen AI or AI developer talent are now outsourcing this to system integrators. And so do you find yourself working with those as channel partners, or how are you then typically brought into those environments?
Absolutely. We work both direct to organizations as well as through channel partners, and all different types of channel partners, whether they be like MLOps providers that we have integrations with, or large cloud or general technology providers, as well as more like traditional business channel providers like we use in cyber quite often to make sure that we can help consolidate those offerings for those who are leveraging channel partners there. We actually have a wide breadth of channel partners here. And I think that's really important just for the incredible rate of adoption of AI and those who need to secure it. I think we really need to leverage the existing networks that are out there in the business communities to be able to just make sure that everyone can secure their artificial intelligence as fast as possible, because we're not on our own time. We're on the attacker timeline here, and that's already certainly picking up pretty substantially. And so we want to work with trusted partners that these customers are already engaged with, so we can go out from there. And we also believe pretty heavily in a strong integration pipeline here. And so, for example, our earliest partner was Databricks, and today you can scan your models with a HiddenLayer scanner natively in Databricks. You can deploy a HiddenLayer secured model in Databricks and on the real-time detection and response side. And we want to keep extending that. Now we do it with Azure ML, and then we'll continue to grow outward and outward there to the point where we can help you secure your models really in preferred deployment mechanism on the ML side. So I think that's going to be really important on the direct technology partnership side. But yeah, we leverage channel partners of all kinds.
Yeah, really cool to hear that Databricks is using your scanner natively within the platform. Just think about the corpus of data, right? The data volumes that they have. And so let's end on one of my favorite questions, which is, how do you think about the future? So we started talking about attacks, how you think about the OWASP top 10 LLM landscape. What are your thoughts overall on the threat landscape in 2030? So let's fast forward by 5 years or so, right? And where do you think HiddenLayer will be then?
It's a really good question, a very important question, especially when we think about, there's two ways we can look at this. First, we can look backwards and we can say, what are patterns that we've seen in other threat landscape evolutions in order to predict what we think is going to happen here with artificial intelligence. And then the second way is, okay, now what's different about that? So if we, based on either the technology itself or other sort of variables that always haven't been the same. So when we look back at sort of those cyclical patterns for any new technology, there's always been really evolutions in the attack landscape, in the threat landscape, to be able to take advantage of them. And AI certainly isn't the first technology that threat actors are going to go, we're going to leave this one alone. We've seen a lot there. And what we see is really that general sort of flow tends to look like, roughly 90% of the attacks become these automated threat actor, where you have a threat actor leveraging like an automated attack tool, downloading something that was either built for red teaming or like an adversarial as a service type of attack that they can get off the dark web. And I think we're going to see the same thing. I think we're already starting to experience a significant amount of it. One of the most simple things we do at HiddenLayer is let you know if somebody's interacting with your model with a known attack framework, because that's an easy sort of understanding of, hey, this person's not doing what you think. And that, I think, is going to handle the majority of it. And then we're going to see some pretty sophisticated attacks. We certainly already are, but where you either see like state actors or advanced persistent threat groups doing things like more curated or targeted attacks. And then maybe that's a little bit like 10% or so, but certainly a minority of the attacks, it definitely ends up being a little bit more targeted, curated, and definitely over longer spans of time versus that scatter shot. Let me see who's vulnerable to these types of attacks so I can move forward. So I definitely think we're going to have that move on. And then to answer your question about what's different and what's happening, there's two major differences. And the first difference is how fast we're deploying artificial intelligence and we're adopting artificial intelligence. It's by far the fastest technological shift we've ever seen. And I think when you look at every organization on the planet today, they're looking for like, how can we leverage AI and how can we get it deployed as fast as possible for our business reasons? But generally speaking, that means you're probably not doing everything you can to plug all of the gaps that represent sort of security vulnerabilities for you. And then the second sort of difference is the technological convergence that I expect as we move forward into the kind of 2030 timeframe. I believe roughly 2 to 3 years from now, you're not going to be able to secure anything without some form of security for artificial intelligence. I think when you look at LLMs replacing search engines, when you look at downloading software that already contains models. If you download Microsoft Office today, you've already downloaded about 40 artificial intelligence models at the application layer. And if you want to secure anything in your environment, any technological asset, you're going to have to be able to secure artificial intelligence. And that's only going to exponentially grow in terms of the different existing kind of technologies that are going to be replaced with AI. What does that mean? I think that means that security for artificial intelligence becomes that foundational layer for all of cybersecurity. And as a platform solution that we believe is leading the way there, what does that mean for HiddenLayer? We believe that we can ultimately be one of the most important pillars in a cybersecurity strategy for any organization. And then we can grow outward with artificial intelligence to secure all assets that are out there. So today it starts with the models, but it moves on and on into the broader ecosystem as aligned with artificial intelligence. As artificial intelligence grows and becomes, in a very positive way, a major sort of accelerator for everything that we want to do on the innovative side, we need to have that security infrastructure equally as accelerated in order to secure these organizations.
I really like how you describe that, which is a lot of this learning that you'll have from protecting AI models and generative AI models will then extend itself into protecting, for example, AI application orchestration, AI DevOps, and we seep into the whole ecosystem as more enterprises are experimenting with generative AI and bring them into their ecosystem.
That's exactly right, Nancy. That's how we view it.
Thank you so much, Tito, for being on the podcast. And actually, almost as if I cued this, Tanner's here to walk us through the product demo, which as a product person, I'm super excited to see how the platform all comes together.
Awesome. Share the screen here. So I'm going to walk you through the platform today. Here we land on the model inventory that tracks all the models coming in from our different cloud providers, different MLOps tooling into one kind of single view for the security for AI. And so we're going to go through a couple of model scans here to kick it off. The first one that we're going to show is going to be an OpenAI model that is ready to go for production and what a safe model should look like. So here we can see we have an OpenAI model. This is the visual transformer model. It is the PyTorch version of the model, and we can see we have some metadata and a very low number of pickle modules. And those pickle modules are important because that allows us to scan these models statically and understand what they're going to do whenever they get loaded. If any threat's going to explode it into memory, we can catch it before that happens. So I'll now show another model here that's going to be an unsafe model. So this is a model coming off of one of the repositories known as Hugging Face, and here we have an unsafe detection. This model is built using the FastAI toolkit, which is an open source toolkit, to basically take a set of data, give it the modality or application that you want, and it'll create a model or application for you from that. And here we can see that we have another PyTorch model but there are a lot more pickle modules that are being brought into the environment. So when you start using these third-party tools to build your models, it's going to add risk and add another reason that you should be scanning those models before you release them into production, because you might not know what those tools are actually adding into your model. Here in this case, it's adding a suspicious call around a global instance of a get attribute that could allow a threat actor to take that, basically make it easier for them to inject code that's going to actually run and not corrupt this model whenever it gets injected into it.
And so, is there a place where, let's say, as a customer, right, onboarding to HiddenLayer, where they can set some of these rules, maybe custom rules, or are these rules really out of the box as customers onboard?
Yeah, so today these rules are out of the box and they get shipped with the model scanner. In the future, we'll definitely expand into allowing customers and to write their own rules, bring their own kind of technology that has maybe even heuristics that are outside of just a signature-based detection as well.
No, this is really helpful. And are these alerts then surface only through the HiddenLayer platform? Or, for example, are there different dashboards that security engineering teams are looking at where these alerts can also be consumed?
Yep, so they can be consumed from the platform itself, but they also will get exported out into different SIM tools. So if you're using already something like a Splunk or something to already triage that all of the alerts coming in from all of your different tooling, we can go directly and plug into those workflows right away.
Mhm. And so, speaking of triaging, let's say HiddenLayer flags an AI model as unsafe. As a customer, what do they do once they get that alert?
Yeah, so it'd really kick off a process today to look into that model and understand where that model's coming from. If it's coming from a third-party repository, it'd probably be as easy as quarantining that model and finding one that's going to better fit your use case that we already know is safe, and so we can recommend those types of models. For a scenario where it's coming in and it's been a homegrown model, that would likely go back to the data science team to say, based on the HiddenLayer scan, they found these opcodes inside of the model that makes it risky. Is there a way that we can actually remediate and get those opcodes out of the model for the next retrain, which would then have to go back to, depending on the framework they're using, to make maybe different calls, or they just need to remove code that maybe they left in there during development time that was used for maybe debugging or model hooking, but that you don't necessarily want to release into your production model.
Understood. And often, in terms of questions that you often get from customers who are seeing this demo from the first time, where do they double click the most?
Yeah, definitely that fast AI example has hit home a lot for some, and I think we've even encountered a few that are using that to bring all of their models to production. That they had no idea that it was bringing all this extra kind of stuff into the model whenever it was packaging that. So it's been interesting to see that a lot of these tools are being used without really understanding how they are affecting or changing those models.
Yeah, this is really interesting. And so, is there a report that customers can also generate from this, or as they log on, this is the main dashboard from which they can go and look at essentially the health status of the models in their environment?
Yes, we have a high-level roll-up dashboard here that allows you to break it down by detections, the type of detection based on the MITRE ATLAS tactic, your top suspicious requesters to the model. So when we show the LLM piece here in just a second, you'll see what I mean about the requesters, that we're able to track the inferences to the model by the user that's sending that traffic to the model, and then also the detections by severity as well. And it'll let you know if there's any open detections in the platform too.
Got it. And you mentioned the LLM piece as well. Yeah, love to see that workflow as well.
Awesome. Yeah, so what we have here is we call the LLM sandbox. So basically, we provide a proxy that would sit in between your web server that you're building a chatbot inside of and something like an OpenAI. And it would be able to sit in between inline and be able to inspect that prompt and model output to make sure that there's nothing in there that would be something like a prompt injection or a jailbreak attack, make sure that we're not leaking data through any kind of PII scenarios. And then we can also do things like block specific modalities. So if you don't want to allow your HR team to generate code or to pull or copy into URLs from the model that it's responding with, you can make sure to block that, and that model response will not go back to them. And so we'll see a scenario here in just a second for that. Jumping into it, if I go into the sensitive information disclosure example here, I can see that I'm asking the model to summarize an invoice, and it contains an IBAN number, which would be something that you don't want to necessarily leak outside of your environment. If I go ahead and analyze this, the model is going to do exactly what I asked, and it's going to provide me a summary with that IBAN number that I provided it. So there's a couple different scenarios here that we could do. We could either redact that going back to the user if we have a internally hosted model that we don't mind the PIIs going into, but we don't necessarily want those users to take that and copy it into something. So we can redact that here. So I'll show an example of the redaction. We go ahead and enable redaction in the policy. We can click analyze again here. And we can now see that the model has responded, but on the way back out, we have now redacted that output IBAN number so that no one can take that and copy it into something that's going to go out to the general public or something, for example. But even going further, if we want to make sure that if we are using OpenAI, we want to make sure that IBAN number or RPII isn't ending up in any of their training data, we can actually go ahead and block any kind of data leakage on the input side. So this means if we identify any kind of PI entities inside of that input, we're going to short circuit and not send that to the model, and we'll just let you know that it's been blocked. So here's an example of going through that. And now we've said this message is blocked. We can go and see that our input data leakage is going back here. The IBAN number was detected, or IBAN code. We have our policy with alert and block, and we did detect inside of that input. And then to wrap that out, all of those get put into a model card. So this is the model card for the LLM sandbox. We can see that AIDR is enabled, which means we're tracking inferences and detections for that model. So we can see all the different inferences that we've had to the model, the status of that inference, and the requester for that inference. We can go into the detections here. We can see that I've been doing some shenanigans here against this model, but if I open up this last detection, I have a data leakage example, and that was the scenarios we just ran through. And we can get some detection stats on the total number of inferences that I've sent to this model, the total number of convictions that we had during this demo. We can see the MITRE ATLAS tactic that's associated with that being data leakage. And so we can also have a workflow in here where you can come in and, as a security analyst, I could come in and take notes around what I'm going to actually do to remediate against this, and I could close out this detection. This detection can stay open and keep tracking my usage to the model as well if you want to keep further understanding their behavior.
I see. And so to what level of detail are, let's say, to your VP of security analysts able to drill into?
Yeah, so we're working on exposing a lot of that observability into the platform, but there's a lot of data that they can get through the API workflows that can go into tooling that they're already using. So I know we already mentioned SIM, for example, but they could get all of those kind of events around the inference, events around all of our detection engines, and the conviction events back into their SIM that they could then build dashboards and further understand and dig into what's going on here on the actual attack itself.
I see. And in terms of you're capturing all of these events that get alerted, are you able to then trace it back to the role or the user, that initiated that event, right? For example, you can flag unsafe employees or maybe errand employees and see, hey, what's actually going on with this individual?
Yep. So exactly right. Here we have the requester ID, which is my username that I'm logged into the platform here as. So what we could do to actually respond to this attack we could say we don't actually want to allow this user to use the LLM anymore. So we could cut them off from having access while everyone else could have access to it. So maybe it's something like I have a workflow of I want to give that user some security training before I actually let them back into using the LLM again. And so you could have that block them for a certain amount of time.
Gotcha. And I think what's really cool here, Tanner, is as you gain more, let's say, telemetry about the type of users, the type of, for example, conviction events that get flagged or alerting, you actually build maybe some libraries of different rules or findings, right? Of when this happens, maybe initiate this remediation next steps.
Yeah, definitely. We're definitely working on some like behavioral playbooks to understand based on these types of queries over time, what would you want to do and what would you want to understand of how the user is actually attacking that model or what they're able to get out of the model in terms of features that they might have leaked or things that they know around decisions that model's making.
I really appreciate the demo today, Tanner. Anything else that you would like to share with our audience about this cool new platform?
No, I think we had to show the two main pieces. There's one more piece that doesn't necessarily get highlighted in this demo, which is the behavioral analysis engine behind the scenes that's able to actually track these users over time and understand if they're trying to do things like model theft and the sort, similar to the recent OpenAI and ByteDance example there. And that's something that we track as well.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much, Tanner.
My only addition there is if anybody wants to try it out, check it out at hiddenlayer.com and we can get it to you. We have versions of our product that are full on premises. We have SaaS, we have hybrid models as well. So whether you need to scan models that you're bringing into your organization or models that you're shipping out, whether you want to secure your LLMs, whether you want to secure your models that are internal to the organization that are a little bit more purpose driven, we have a solution for it. So happy to do a free POC for you and go forward from there.
Amazing. Yeah, we'll certainly share our link with our listeners here and also any white papers that you have about the latest launch. Thank you for tuning in to the DeFUD podcast. For more hot takes and content, please leave a kind comment and click the buttons below to like, share, and subscribe. Doing so really means a lot.